Hi, everyone. That was such a perfect setup for my talk. Thank you, guys. It really was, talking about competition, talking about innovation, and of course about crowdsourcing radical innovation, which is what I'm here to talk about a little bit today. As Epi said, I'm with the XPRIZE Foundation, and I hate to break it to many of you, but I probably have the best job on the planet. I'm the executive director of a startup within XPRIZE, which is taking XPRIZE to scale. And it's kind of an innovation center on the edge of what is now a pretty large organization. We live in some amazing times, right? We've heard that a lot today. And it's absolutely true. I want to take you back to 4,000 years of our past history. And think about this for a second. Over the last 4,000 years or so, if you really wanted to affect world change, do something that was really radical, change the course of humanity, you probably had to be a king or a queen to affect change at that level. In the last 100 years, you probably had to be a big industrialist, a robber baron kind of industrialist, or maybe a big scientist like Einstein. To win a Nobel Prize. But all that has changed, hasn't it? It's completely changed. Now we've got this amazing thing that we all talk about, the crowd, and ordinary people that make up this crowd. People like you and I can actually make a difference. We can actually affect world change. Is there anyone here who doesn't believe that or thinks I'm like Maria, too much of an idealist? Because I'm here to tell you that this is happening right now. Many of you are change makers in your own right, and the crowd is very powerful. We at XPRIZE are looking at how do we take the crowd to the next level of innovation. So we're not just looking at small, linear changes, but we're looking at innovators all over the world to come up with exponential change. People understand the difference between the word linear and exponential, right? I mean, linear is if I want to walk from here to there, I kind of take one step in front of the other. Exponential is first step I'm here, the second step I'm across the street, and the third step I'm in another country, and by the sixth step I'm already one way around the world, and by the 20th I'm 5 times around the planet. Exponential leaps ahead. And the crowd is allowing us to do that. I got to get this clicker right, sorry. Maria, can we move on? So tell me, if you really could affect world change, what would you do? Would you seed rain clouds and solve the water crisis on our planet? You got to help me out, Maria. Or would you use artificial intelligence to educate the 1.3 billion children who cannot read or write and don't have schools to go to? Or would you capture the power of the sun from suborbital space and beam it back down to Earth to feed our impending growing energy needs on our planet? And how would you do all of this quickly, affordably, and assure that it reaches scale? But most of all, how would you involve the world of innovators out there? All those others on our planet, not just the scientists, not just the academicians, not just governments. How would you go to the crowd and involve them in solving some of these problems? Well, the crowd as such is really intimidating. Does anybody feel that, or is it not the right conference to admit that in? It probably isn't the right venue to admit that in, but this is kind of intimidating, especially when you're looking for big, large-scale innovations. It's sort of like looking at millions and millions of haystacks and going, oh my God, where the hell is that needle, right? And this is a big problem. It's a big problem. It's great to talk about the crowd. It's great to talk about we're going to reach innovators everywhere. Really? That's really bloody hard. And when you're looking at radical change, big innovations, hardware, a lot of times, big scientific leaps, well, the crowd can be a lot of noise. and very little substance sometimes. And that's a challenge. It's a real, real challenge. And so the point is, how do we allow these millions of haystacks to reveal that precious needle? And this is exactly the dilemma we are facing at XPRIZE, and this is what we've kind of come up with a solution for on our platform. XPRIZE is an innovation engine. We are a catalyst for transformational change. Sounds really big and exciting. Very, very big words, but it's true. I'll give you some instances. Very, very exciting organization, actually, to work with. Our tagline, and this is how we all walk around, truly believing that we can make the impossible possible. We are in the business of taking science fiction and making it science reality. And how do we do this? And how do we get these innovations? How do we inspire the crowd to come up with these innovations? Well, we believe, you got to go back one, please. Thank you. We believe that people aren't just going to come up and innovate. They're not. They have to be motivated. They have to be inspired. And above all, they have to be incentivized. So very simply, we provide that kind of incentive. What incentivizes people? Two things. One is money, because without money, nothing gets done. And we are talking, like I said, about large-scale, radical innovations, a lot of hardware, sometimes a lot of science, technology. Technology is at the core of what we do. So it takes money to do that. So we put up a lot of money to try and inspire this kind of radical innovation and get people to solve our problems, the world's problems. But the second thing that's even bigger than the money, and I'll talk about that a little later in more depth, is the power to change the world. Every one of us human beings really wants that. Our human nature, our base fundamental human nature is altruistic. And this isn't just seeing all the good in the glass half full all the time and the best in people. It truly is that way. Everywhere you go in the world, you see it. We all want this. We all want to have meaning in our lives, and we want to do something that will change the lives of others, will improve the lives of others. And our platform gives innovators that. So, but this whole thing is not very new. It's actually been going on for kind of a long time. We're talking about the crowds now in a much more organized way. But tell me, what do some of these innovations here have in common? Help me out, Maria. How about the next one? Anybody just shout it out? Anything? Yeah. They were all innovations, breakthroughs that changed the course of humanity, that came about because of a prize, of an incentive. Let me explain. This is not going to be a 20-minute talk. I'm telling you all right now. You got to help me out, Maria, okay? Because I like to keep this high energy. All right. So 200 years ago, 220 years ago, Napoleon Bonaparte. Everybody remembers Napoleon? Everyone remembers history a little bit, right? So Napoleon was marching across Europe. His armies were being defeated. And you know who was defeating him? It wasn't the Russians. They were retreating. They were burning all the villages, burning all their fields and retreating. What was defeating him and his mighty armies was hunger, was starvation, was winter. And so Napoleon put up a prize for 15,000 francs, 220 years ago, 15,000 francs for the first person who could safely preserve and transport food. And Nicholas Appert, he was an ordinary candy maker. And he came up with a revolutionary technology called canning that we all use till today, right? How many of you have touched a can of food in the last 48 hours? Right? It's something we're so familiar with. This technology has not changed, and it allowed us, pre-refrigeration, to really be able to safely preserve food. And 300 years ago, the British Navy, tired of losing ships at sea, asked the crowd, asked innovators in England at the time, to come up with a technology to measure longitude. John Harrison, an ordinary clockmaker, astounded the British Navy because they all thought that some big admiral or somebody from the intelligentsia would come up with this solution. But no, an ordinary London clockmaker came up with this amazing chronometer to measure longitude. And this innovation has helped all the GPS tracking and all the great innovations that have come from it today. They put up 20,000 pounds for this. And they were so shocked that an ordinary person had come up with this kind of innovation that they didn't give him the money. And yeah, and he died a pauper, fighting in the court system till the day he died. He got some of it, but he never got all of his money. Why? Because people did not believe that an ordinary person, someone who wasn't quite in the know or in the field, could come up with something that was so completely groundbreaking. And the story that inspires us at XPRIZE the most is a story of Charles Lindbergh. Everyone knows who Lindbergh is. He was the father of modern aviation. He's the person who flew, first person to fly from New York to Paris, a transatlantic flight. But very few people know that he was actually motivated by a $25,000 prize that was put up by a hotelier by the name of Raymond Ortigue for the first pilot to make that flight. And fewer even people know that he was a real underdog in the race. Many people had died trying. Many big aviators of the time, famous aviators, had tried and failed. Lindbergh was a nobody. He couldn't even get a plane. He had had his pilot's license for only 3 years. Only 3 years. And as a pilot myself, I'll tell you, it's a very, very daunting task when you've only had a license for 3 years and you're attempting such a radical, radical flight. But he was very meticulous. He planned and he planned. He knew what he was doing. He tried things completely differently, and he took huge risks, and he won it. That wasn't just inspiration in itself. What was even more inspirational was that within the next 12 months, aviation stocks soared. People's perception was changed. People realized, regular, ordinary people realized that, hey, this is something we can all do. And commercial aviation as an industry, a $1 trillion industry today, was born from this one flight. And this flight took place because of this one incentive and this one prize. And these are the things that really, really inspired us at XPRIZE. So about 15 years ago, our founder, Peter Diamandis, who Epi mentioned earlier, Peter, who is in the space industry, he's an engineer from MIT and a doctor from Harvard, and he tried to get into NASA, and he couldn't. He tells a story, it's because he was really short, which he is, but he tells a story, so I could tell it. And he wanted to open up space flight for commercial viability. This was the mid-90s, late 90s. All these satellites were going up into orbit. He saw a great opportunity for the private sector, but only governments till then were allowed to go to space. And so he said, well, inspired by Lindbergh, inspired by Napoleon, why don't I put up a prize for $10 million, at the time working out of his garage, no money to his name. Why don't I put up a prize for $10 million for the first team that can do 4 very, very simple things. It had to be a privately funded team. Why? Because governments weren't doing this. They have to fly build a spacecraft that can fly 100 kilometers into suborbital space. Why? Because it was enough to prove a point. It was enough to go to where the work was, where the satellites were. And it had to carry 3 passengers. Why a passenger payload of 3? A pilot, a co-pilot, and 1 layperson, like a technician, who didn't know how to fly. Again, to prove the point. And lastly, it had to do 2 flights in 2 weeks. And why? Because it had to be a reusable aircraft. NASA space shuttle, it takes months between flights just to replace parts, just to get the shuttle ready for its next flight. So this had to be something much more agile and had to happen really, really quickly. As a result of this prize, we had 26 teams from 7 nations apply. The most brilliant part about this is that, remember, it's just a $10 million purse, right? The winning team would only win $10 million. But the teams collectively, across all of these countries, put in over $100 million in R&D. Over $100 million in R&D. So imagine if you are a private sector, big private sector company, and you have a certain limited R&D budget. You're looking for big innovation, something completely different. You can leverage what you have 10 times with this kind of a model. 10 times. They put in $100 million in investment. And the best news is that all of them are working in the space industry today. A lot of them were just innovators from other areas. They weren't quite working in this. In fact, none of them were working in the space industry. And the winner, Scale Composites, that won the Ansari Prize, we brought Richard Branson to the airfield when it landed the second time, and he bought the company on the spot. So we do a lot for our teams, for our innovators. Once they come into our competitions, this is now Virgin Galactic, this prize gave rise to a whole new industry, the commercial spaceflight industry, with players like SpaceX, Elon Musk's SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, all kinds of other companies that are competing with governments, that are competing with NASA today for contracts. Since then, this is I think, the picture we're most proud of, because this is in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, and the Spirit of St. Louis, which was Lindbergh's plane, is hanging up there, and Spaceship One is now hanging right next to it. So yeah, pretty cool. Since then, we said, well, would this model work for other things? Do you guys remember the Deep Horizon oil spill? It was a big deal in the US. I don't know how big a deal it was in Asia. You know, the Crisis News Network, CNN, had it on nonstop, showing all the oil gushing in the bottom of your screen. It was all very, very dramatic. Anyway, when the oil spill happened, we realized that the technologies being used were over 50 years old, no new innovations. And we thought, well, would this model work in this particular kind of a disaster industry? Can we put out a prize very quickly for teams to come together to find a new way to clean up oil? We had about 36 teams, and we had 6 teams make the finals. And all the 6 teams bested the industry standard by at least 50%. All of them, again, working in a whole new industry today, not just in oil cleanup, but Arctic oil, different kinds of industries or sub-industries that were created because of this disaster. Wow, I'm really running out of time. So I'm going to try and, if Maria helps me out, I'll pump through this a little quicker. So we've got some competitions that are going on right now, some really exciting competitions. And I'm here to ask you all for a couple of things today. And these are our existing competitions, but I'm going to talk about some of our new competitions. We're looking for teams. We're looking for people and platforms like yours to augment our message, to go out there and find the innovators at the edge. This is a big prize that we have out right now. It's sponsored by Google. It's a $30 million prize for the first team to land a robotic rover on the moon. Nobody's going to the moon anymore. And nobody's going to the moon for any meaningful reason anymore. The moon is ripe for exploration. It's ripe for, dare I say it, colonization. The moon is ripe for mining of certain resources we cannot find here on Earth. And of course, it's a perfect platform to do a whole bunch of scientific research, medical research in low gravity environments. It's a great platform to explore our solar system and explore our origins. So there's a lot that the moon can do for us, but nobody's going there. So why not the private sector? And why not go out to innovators across the world and say, hey, come and try and do 4 things. You got to take off from Earth. You got to land on the moon. You got to row 500 meters. And you got to send back high-resolution digital imagery, a message from the moon to prove you're on the moon. That's all you have to do. It's a robot. It's going to sit there forever, actually. Yeah, because there's no atmosphere. It's going to sit there for a really long time. So anyway, and again, we've had teams from all over the world respond to this. We're in the final stretch of the competition. We have about 4 or 5 real contenders. Just like you saw in the last exercise that we did, a lot of mergers happen. We facilitate those mergers. Our teams are our heroes. We all have a final customer. For us, it's our teams, our innovators. We bring investment to the table. We bring mentoring to the table, everything they need so that they can focus on coming up with the next big, radical, world-changing idea. And I'll talk about my favorite team, Team Indus from India. And Team Indus, this group of guys, they knew nothing about the moon. I mean, they literally applied for this prize, and then they Googled, how do you get to the moon? I mean, they did. True story, 5 years ago. It's a bunch of 8 lunatics, as they call it. They're truly lunatics, you know? And they decided that, listen, we don't need to know how to do this, but we do know how to put together a damn good company that could have commercial viability. They saw great opportunities here, a whole new frontier. There are all these startup guys. They had absolutely no background. A couple of them were engineers, but certainly not this kind of engineering. And they hired the best and brightest minds in India to come work for them. They got a little bit of seed investment. They struggled and worked out of their garage for a really long time. They just closed another big round of investment, and they're in the finals, and they're probably going to the moon in early next year, which is pretty amazing. So, you know, we talk about this stuff, and everyone tells me, well, you know, Zenia, you're talking about really sophisticated hardware. I really can't do that. Well, we've got tons and tons of examples of people just like this. I'm a little out of time, so I'm not telling you about some of the other examples about just regular people. For our last prize, that Wendy Schmidt Oil Cleanup Prize, one of the finalists was a tattoo artist. You know, the media, traditional media, has been pretty good in terms of reaching the masses. And he was tattooing one of his clients in Las Vegas. He's actually kind of a celebrity tattoo artist. He's very famous. And he was tattooing an engineer client of his. And this came on to CNN to say that, you know, XPRIZE has launched a prize for $1.5 million or whatever. And he said, hey, tattoo ink, you know, acts the same way as oil. And on the back of a napkin, they drew a design and they entered as a team. 2 guys who've never done anything like this before. And they didn't win, but they placed very highly. I think they placed number 3 in the finals. This is another very, very exciting competition we have now. Very, very futuristic competition. How many of you here are Star Trek fans? Trekkies, anybody? A Trekkie? Star Trek? Yeah, okay. So do you guys remember when you watch Star Trek, there's the Doctor? His name is Bones, and you know, every time Kirk would come off planet back to the Enterprise, he had this device, you know, in his hand, and he'd scan Kirk's body and go, yeah, you know, you've got Rigerian fever or whatever it was, and you know, the storyline always kind of progressed that Kirk would end up, you know, in isolation with some hot blonde Russian cosmonaut, naked for 2 days, you know, the inevitable storyline, you know. Anyway, so we said, hey, let's take science fiction and make it science reality. The device was called the tricorder in Star Trek. So we said, let's launch a prize, $10 million for a handheld device, has to fit in the palm of your hand, that can non-invasively diagnose up to 18 health conditions, including stroke, cardiac arrest, pneumonia, malaria, tuberculosis, diabetes, all kinds of stuff. 18 health conditions. We're in the final round, 10 final teams. We had over, I think, 380 teams from across over 50 countries apply. We're in the final round of testing. Now we're testing on humans. Testing begins next month. And the competition's been running, and then hopefully we'll award the prize sometime this year. Again, we went out to the crowd. We got amazing results. Some of the teams are made up of, like this one guy who was caught in Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and he and his wife couldn't get to a doctor, and she was sick and couldn't get to a doctor for a long time. And by the time they got there, her cancer had progressed. They didn't even know what was wrong with her, but her cancer had leapfrogged ahead and was stage 3, and she died. So anyway, and he was motivated by that to do something that every one of us can afford. Every one of us can have this in our pockets, have this at home, so we know what's going on with our bodies and our children especially, and our loved ones. We have a prize. It's already kind of late in the day because this competition, the enrollment closes on the 30th of April. But again, a very exciting prize. It's our Global Literacy Prize, $15 million put up by Elon Musk, and Elon wants us to create software that can go on every tablet, every phone, all over the world, completely open sourced. But the software has to take a child from zero literacy to a certain level of literacy and numeracy, basic reading, writing, and mathematics within a 2-year time frame in a no-teacher environment. So where there are no schools, where there are no teachers, but yet there is some level of connectivity. You know, so how can we educate the 1.3 billion children who don't know how to read or write? We have over 500 teams from, get ready, over 60 countries registered already. And we're looking actively for more teams. So again, if you are plugged into software developer networks or any other kind of networks that could find us teams, please go ahead and tweet about this prize. So, and we're launching, we just launched in India, and we're looking at issues like water. We're looking, and just cycle through these, Maria, thank you. We're looking at issues like waste. How do we clean up waste on our planet? A country like India produces 100 billion tons of solid waste a year. This is a disaster. What do we do with it? How do we not just clean it up? How do we take it, and how do we create exponential worth from it? Electrification, 800 million people still have no access to electricity. What can we do about that? We have a whole suite of prizes in our ocean, regarding ocean health and climate change. And now we're looking at issues like social justice. We're launching a Women's Safety Prize in India this year. We're just starting the design of that prize after we launch our water prize in India. So we really believe this. We really believe that the day before something is a breakthrough, it's still a crazy idea. I want you to think about that statement for a second. How many times have we kind of thought, you know, this would never happen, this is absurd, this is ridiculous, and then it happens, and it changes our perception about everything, right? The word that everybody in Silicon Valley hates now, because that's where it was born, the word disruption, you know. I was hearing Maria's talk earlier and how she is disrupting the traditional news agencies, completely disrupting that platform. It's absolutely brilliant. But the day before these things become real, they're crazy ideas. We are all about those crazy ideas. We're all about investing in those crazy ideas. So I'm going to wrap up real soon if I can move on. This is another prize that we have coming up. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I'm losing time here. We have Carbon Prize, a transporter prize for autonomous flight transportation that you can call or with an app like you can call an Uber, and it's a pod or whatever it might be, a jetpack, I don't know yet. It comes to you and it leapfrogs traditional road systems. Imagine what that would do for disaster response, for ambulances, etc. We're also launching an ocean mapping prize. We're going to be looking for innovators across the world to kind of work on these issues with us. And I already talked about this before, why teams really compete. And they truly compete for two reasons. And it's not just the money. It's about the ability to change the world. And also the ability, I want you to think about this for a second too, the ability to be the first in a new industry. There's no amount of SEO, search engine, optimization money you can pay to be number one on Google. Maria, you got to stay with me. Thank you. So you got to go back a couple slides. So I just want to, I'm sorry this is not quite worked out the way I hope, but I want you to think about what you would do if you truly could change the world. If you really were involved in radical change, what would you do? Would you 3D print organs that can save thousands and thousands of lives? Or would you design a colony on Mars for further exploration so that in our generation, it's going to happen 100 years in the future. Elon says it's going to happen in 20, 40 years, but it's going to happen. Can we do it in our generation? Is that what you're going to do? Or this is a great, actually, solution for Singapore. Or would you grow food in the sky? How are we going to feed 9 billion people by 2015? 9 billion people, and running out of land, running out of arable land. So what are you going to do? Are you going to create an army of nanobots that course through your body and destroy cancer cells and thereby save millions of lives every year? So I'm here to ask you two questions. One is, I already asked you this, please let your networks know we're looking for amplifiers. Come talk to me, find me on Twitter. I'm horrible on Facebook, I'm over Facebook. But find me on Twitter and find me on email and answer this one question for me today. In this vast universe of possibilities and amazing world change, what would you prize? Hope to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to open one question before, because we're running late.
Yes, I know.
One question. Anyone?
Yeah. Sorry, this is a very basic question, but who comes up with the prize ideas? Is this something that's generated from your team, or can that be crowdsourced, for example, from people?
So the way we come up with prize ideas is actually a very exciting process in itself. We call our process visioneering. It's just our own kind of made-up word, like your made-up word earlier today. So visioneering is a process where we bring a bunch of experts together. We bring some lay people together, or in tangential fields, So we would bring private sector, let's take energy, for example. So if we're thinking about, I just did one in Singapore over the last couple of days with the government here. And this was a grand challenge as visioneering. So we talked about future of energy, future of aging, and how we can use artificial intelligence with the aging population. And we talked about the future of water, and we talked about climate change. Those were the four things we talked about. So we had a bunch of people from the National Science and Research Foundation here in Singapore. We had academics. We had some people from private sector. Some people who were tangentially related to these topics. Usually when I do these in other countries, I didn't have a lot of time here, but I'll have activists, social activists in the room, people who are journalists who have been writing or blogging about these issues as well. And then we take them through this all-day process where we teach them to do what we do in kind of a light touch way. And then they sit down and they design these prizes. And they design these amazing kind of kernels of truth into each and every single prize, where the prize in itself, the whole design usually doesn't make it to the end. But again, we get all these perspectives together in the room, and then we figure out what is the real challenge we're trying to solve. And the big thing that we do is we don't look at solutions. We define the problem, and that's what we do at Visioneering. We define the problem in a way that leaves it wide open to crazy ideas and to madcap kind of solutions. So.
Great. Maria, thank you very much. Thanks for coming. This is here's a little gift from us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Take care.
Please.
Thanks.